Bronwyn Fischer went on to earn an MFA at the University of Guelph, and just last year burst onto the literary scene in this country with the publication of The Adult by Random House. The novel takes place on, forgive me for saying this, a very thinly disguised U of T campus. And I'll have to admit that some of my colleagues, like, they needed me to read the book first before they wanted me to clear. They wanted to make sure about, how the campus looked in the book. Are there any nefarious shenanigans that would soil the sterling reputation of our esteemed institution? I can assure you that if you haven't read the book, there are some shenanigans that take place, but no campus building was irreparably harmed during the publication of the book. More importantly, The Adult richly captures, this is the book, richly captures the anxieties and thrills, the confusion and emerging confidence that are viscerally felt by so many students at the beginning of their education, at the beginning of adulthood. It's a real accomplishment and the sign of great things to come. And so it gives me great pleasure to welcome Bronwyn Fischer.
Hello. Okay, I'm going to read a bit. And I'm going to just start from the beginning and I'll go for a little. Okay, this is the prologue part before chapter 1. Soon, but not yet, Nora will look up and she will see me sitting at a distance. In the wet grass, the imprints of Nora's shoes will go back slowly, and I won't suspect that she's walking towards me. After Nora meets me on the bench, it will be difficult to recall that in the beginning, there were moments so plain and unconsumed that I felt I could watch them like a distant view, like hills rolling away. When she holds out her hand and asks, "Do you mind if I sit?" no other memory will exist without brushing backwards or forwards over the moment her eyes look down at me. The soft, impenetrable skull of the world will suddenly harden, and everything will be seen through the damp and willful light of our first meeting. That's chapter 1. At first, the trees behind the McKinnon dorm had looked like a real woods. The leaves were facing up as though it might rain. I stood by the bedroom window, my nose accidentally touching the glass, and I watched my parents walk down the path towards their car. On the drive, the car window hadn't been shut all the way. The wind had buffeted as we drove, killed all conversation. My mother, a few times, looked over her shoulder at me, arm pressing against the back of my father's seat so that she could crane her neck to see. I wanted her to ask if I would be all right. I wanted her to turn to my father and say, "Are we really going to leave her?" The beginning of a tearful conversation. But the next time my mother turned, she met my eyes and she mouthed, "That's making a lot of noise." And I realized she hadn't been looking back at me, but at the sound of the wind rushing by. I felt like I'd had a terrible day, even though I hadn't. The day had been long, not terrible. But being alone, everything I thought was true, so I thought, what a terrible day, and I sat in my room. My suitcase was still open. Before they left, my parents had made the bed for me. I thought of them pulling the sheets up, patting the duvet. I'd noticed the wrinkles on their hands as they smoothed out the sheets, tight gold rings around their fingers. Were they old? I'd wanted to lie down and have them make the bed over me as though I were a child. But I'd stayed standing, watching unhelpfully as they worked. It didn't take long before everything was made, unpacked. My parents had looked around the dorm room and then they looked at me. The walls around us were white and bare, absolute possibility. When I met their eyes, I felt like promising them something, but what to promise eluded me, and with the bed already pressed so flat, my father said, "Okay, we should leave." In the afternoon, there were a lot of introductions. We stood in circles all over campus. We found a landmark, played a get-to-know-you game. The grass had been wet and soft like washed hair. At 4 o'clock, we stood under the arc of an old tower, and our guide, a girl a few years older, said, "At some point, you'll hear the carillon." We nodded. That's 51 bronze bells. I looked at all the heavy stones that had been placed, one onto the other, to reach the height of the tower. "It's pretty cool," the guide said. I accidentally met her eyes. She smiled at me assuredly, and I suddenly wished that she would take me aside and tell me that I should stick with her, that we should hang out. But before I could smile back or consider another more compelling expression, She and the rest of the group had started to walk away. Near the dorms, we played another game. As instructed, I said my name and then a hobby, and then 2 truths and a lie. Everyone guessed the lie correctly, and I wondered how I could be transparent already. It had been a bright day. We wore matching red shirts that said Frosh. They smelled like vinegar, and by evening, the printing had already started to peel, making some of us Rosh and Bosh. We ate in a big group arranged by dorm floor. We kept talking and talking. I watched the girl across from me chew while the girl beside her asked, "Where did you go to high school?" A slipstream of questions and answers. Was it Ashley who'd gone to Oakwood? Was it Fiona sitting across from me? And was it rude to ask? And how often was it rude to ask if that was in fact her name? I wanted something unequivocal to bond us, but altogether our voices chattered and choired indistinct. I wished that one of our voices would catch. I thought a couple good hard words could maybe start a fire. That was all we needed. Smoke underneath us, the table crackling. At first, we would all be slow to react, but then we'd get going. Nothing to blow the fire out with, we would have to use our breaths. As we stood over the table, smoke would billow out to the high ceiling of the dining hall, and the flames would go out. We would all be red-faced and tired, so bonded and accomplished that we would probably be able to leave school without degrees. Our one meal lifelong. You guys want to go out? It was a warm night. Everyone's makeup was darker than their skin. Our shoes sounded wet against the ground. We moved off campus towards a bar. Inside, we sat at a table near the wall. A girl named Clara raised an arm over her head to get our attention. She wore a strapless shirt, and I felt like I'd looked at her armpit for too long, and that she'd noticed. She told us to make sure we knew our birthdays if we were using fakes. She was already 19. Do you have a fake? I shook my head at the girl beside me, who showed me an ID that belonged to her cousin, but that she thought would work because their eyes were similar. She thought their differently styled hair would actually play to her advantage, because changing your haircut could really affect the look of your face. She went ahead of me and didn't have any problems. I had an underage wristband put around my wrist. Everyone ordered beers because no one wanted to order what their mothers ordered, and we'd seen men order beer. The girl who looked like her cousin poured some of hers into an empty water glass, and I drank from it. The tabletop was sticky. On the walls, there were string lights and bicycle parts. It looked as though someone's garage had been turned into an art installation. You said you're from up north? Yeah, you said you had 2 sisters? Where up north are you from? Are you close with your sisters? What do your parents do? The girl across from me had a tattoo, a snake coming down her arm. I thought if I ever got a tattoo, it would be of a husband telling his wife that he wanted to move from their nice house to live in the wilderness. And then on the opposite arm, I'd get his wife, her eyes held in the longest blink. I said, my parents own a lodge. It was actually called Lakeside Inn and Resort, but I thought calling it a resort would give the wrong impression. I could have said inn, but I thought lodge sounded more wooden. My parents had renamed it Lakeside Inn and Resort when they bought it. Before, it had been called Timothy's Lodgings. The place was a cluster of 5 cabins. There was a main house with a front desk and a dining room, and there was an outdoor fire pit where people cooked packs of hot dogs and just caught fish. If you were to enter our town from the left side, coming north to south, you would find 1 grocery store, 1 restaurant, and 4 churches. The day before I left, one of the church marquises said, if you got arrested for being a Christian, would there be enough evidence to prove it? I'd heard my dad say once that the only thing the town could really support was people praying for money, and the room had laughed. I thought of repeating this to the girl on my left, Annie. That's cool, she said. Yeah, I said, it's on Lake Tomogamy. Annie shook her head. I haven't heard of it. It's really small, I said, not the lake, but the town. She gave me a small laugh and looked down at the table. I couldn't tell if she was laughing because I was embarrassing myself, or if she was laughing because we were at a bar and drinking and we didn't know each other. We all swapped beers. We were deciding what we should like. I was tempted to say that I liked the one that was dark, brown, the one the bartender had said was hoppy. But it wouldn't be true, and I thought everyone would be able to tell. The girl with the tattoo rubbed her hand against her knee and said, I think I like the dark one. We all looked at her. She shifted in her chair and then drank another sip. As everyone went on talking, I watched her eyes slip from the conversation to her glass, and for a moment I felt steady, right to have said nothing. On the way home from the bar, the group separated. A few girls went to a second bar, and some went to a frat house. For the rest of us, the way back to the dorm seemed long. You know, just because we're going back to the dorm doesn't mean we have to go to sleep, Laura said. When we got up to our floor, I left the group quietly and sat back in my room. I felt like a run then. The pressure of eyes looking at me had been lifted, but my throat was hot from drinking, and when I went over to the window, I could still see the soft bends of my parents' backs as they walked away. I could hear talking through a vent, laughter intermittently. I felt stupid for leaving myself out. I sat on my bed. I watched a video called Crunchy Chicken Cooked in the Middle of the Forest, No Talking. The man builds a fire, runs his hand through a nearby stream, pets a cat that's been following him. Then he brings out his heavy cast iron pan, shows us his salt and oil. The only sounds are of the stream, the fire, and the chicken crackling. When the chicken is almost brown, the man crouches and starts cutting basil on the flat of a tree stump. He cuts with a slow, smug rhythm that seems self-aware, and suddenly the natural calm of the brown forest floor and of the moss and weeds that surround the fire pit feels inflicted. I stopped the video, and then I noticed that the dorm had gotten quiet. I stepped out of my room. I wanted to go outside to the trees beyond the window. They reminded me of Temagami. I wondered if standing among them would make me feel sad or happy about leaving. If I felt happy, then it was simple. It would mean that I didn't have to worry and that the choice to come to school was justified, already good for me. If I felt sad, it wouldn't mean the opposite necessarily. I decided to expect to feel sad, and then I also decided that neither feeling should mean very much at this stage. Annie was sitting in the common room. She held the book open against her chest. She was wearing a little toque that made her look cold. It occurred to me that if I asked her to come outside with me, we might have the kind of moment that makes people friends. We might both stare at the trees, unusually gray, unable to think of a color brighter. Our steps would be louder than usual on the sidewalk, and for a moment we would mistake ourselves as the only two people alive, and this would bring a sudden gladness. It would vanish every question we had about our possible futures, and we would become suddenly strong and purposeful. Annie smiled. "Are you going back out?" she asked. "Yeah, I think so," I said, a finality that made her nod politely. I opened my mouth as if the space between roof of mouth and tongue might give more conversation, but because I said nothing, Annie just looked at me, and I had to whistle until the elevator arrived. Down by the trees, the black sky seemed more distant without stars. Behind the dipping branches, the city was easy to see. The light from high windows made burrows of white and yellow through the night. I tried to look into the blackest row of trees, a place where they had been planted narrowly together, a thicket where the needles of their branches overlapped. But between each tree, there was a space where the darkness fell away, not like Temagami. I could look and look, but the darkness would never look back at me. I waited a minute for realization, for the assurance of some resounding feeling, but all I could think was that the trees here did not make a real woods, although, with the sound of the street nearby, people's voices and cars, there was the same sense of unknown company.
Just gonna go there. There will be time, we'll have time for questions afterwards, and maybe you can just team up, you can move the chairs, you can do that. Like Zachary is a writer, editor, and artist. Since their time at U of T, they've attended the Yale Writers Workshop and the University of Guelph, published a novel, won a Lmabda Literary Fellowship, worked as an editor at the Puritan, set a world record in the high jump, and conquered a small planet leading an army of chipmunks. Not all of those are true. What I mean to say is they've done a lot. I'm going to let them tell you the details of that trajectory because I actually don't have the chronology straight in my head. What I do have very clearly in my head is the collection of poems that, like, I think is going to be reading from tonight. More Sure is a book that, as its opening poem declares, wants to let the fabric of the unknown tear beyond mending. Sometimes tender, sometimes biting and full of acerbic wit, The book draws from the Western literary tradition, particularly with ancient Greek sources, but wrestles with that tradition as it attempts to forge new life in a contemporary world with all its pain and possibility. Students in my classes often hear me talk about the importance of play in poetry, and that just because something is playful doesn't mean it isn't deadly serious. But there's a sense of wit and play, and the service of profound questions and discovery are at the heart of Light's work. And so it brings me great pleasure to welcome Light back.
You know, I try to be safer than this, but I don't think I can. I don't think I can read poems with a mess. But, this is my book. It's called Moisture, and it starts with this poem called God Particles, which is this. Hope, born our way in that inauspicious beak. Hope to lead a life in which we were taught to deserve due to agony. Writing in circles around one another all night, walking in circles until, dizzy, we collide beneath the mountain's weight and manifest a power that would be denied us were we to ask for. Hope and no more asking. But the fabric of the known tear beyond mending, let it all collapse into what we here comprise. Split skies, as the world ends, begins again. Calm on the horizon, thunder on the wing. This is qubits. The engineer, my father, is perfecting his second quantum computer. I was the first. Transgender life is superposition, basically. Bickner's girlfriend, Schrödinger's coyote. His dream has been to wield Alexander's sword against knots of encryption so complex they have never yet been tied, even in theory. He failed with me. I do the opposite, creating such tangles in our conversations daily. In his laboratory, I am introduced his son, light squeezed into something he can see. My newborn sister can fit inside his palm. She might achieve in seconds what would take me immortality. The next poem is kind of a diptych. What do you think? In two parts. Years ago, I came out as a trans person before changing my name, and I lived in this nameless space for a little while, which was an insane place to be in, both logistically and also from like an analytical perspective. I was reading those poems like Someday You'll Love Frank O'Hara, Someday You'll Love Ocean Vuong, all of those, and I ended up with this piece called Someday You'll Love blank Zachary. I spend a year soft launching my reintroduction, trying to say I am kind of between names these days, and then I give up trying. The people cannot fucking take it. Can you imagine Adam's outrage had some beast refused the name he gave it? The people with their language and their pitiable need to feel secure in its dominion over me. What should I call you? Never call me. Agency and language is invalid when you claim it for yourself, apparently. I walk into the party and they hail me the artist formerly known as if that isn't still an invocation. I should have got a DNR tattoo before I shed that skin. The people and their brittle ways of knowing how they seek to shut me in, they plead with me. But I am become fugitive, picker of locks. Behind every door I find the rest of me. Someday, I'll love myself by whatever my name will be. I will introduce myself so effortlessly, come when called in the cafe or doctor's office, invite the eyes of strangers to affix it to me. I have been seeking it in dictionaries, poetry, in my view of trees, the sky, the city, call me all of that. Wind in the leaves, gun stuck to the street, something ubiquitous, genderless, and sweet, as part of me, as the hand that I hold him to shake, inseparable as the nail in its bed beneath, a name that's no hand-me-down to fit me. By which I love myself, I'll sing it constantly, a rhythm that'll build, spill out of me, revealing into autumn, and I'll be ready. You will know me by its certainty. Now, as Professor Stoll mentioned, there will be time for questions later, but at first, I will say for now, at first, since I'm back in this building, I didn't think of myself as a writer, as a hobby. I imagined myself as a musician, an artist. I had no success in these pursuits, but what people did respond positively to always was what of writing was in those mediums, lyrics to songs and texts as part of artworks. I ended up in a workshop across the laneway there with Professor Albert Moritz. And in this workshop, I wrote probably the first serious literary poem of my life, whatever that means. And many years later, that made it into this book, and it's called Venice. The woman I admire says I must see Venice before I die. So that I may die at any time, I will go as soon as possible. I will walk in circles and visit the Guggenheim Museum. I will walk backward with my eyes closed. I will take off my clothes and swim in a canal, shower off the dirty water, and go naked on the roof. Sit on the roof and drink wine from the Veneto, hold myself and shiver in the wind. The closest I have so far been to Venice is the town of Vipiteno, deep in northern Italy. From there, easily I could have driven on to Venice, but I wanted to leave something unresolved there in that country. Like how I never do everything I have to do today, so where to start the next, or like how, when given a chance, I leave a book behind in a new friend's living room, so I may see them again to collect it. And if they have read it in the meantime, we'll have something to talk about. Other than the band, what might I talk about in Venice? You called your own train on Sunday. Who built that railway on the coin's edge anyhow? Who packed your bags? I helped. I peeled and sliced the napkins. By the time you find the Ziploc and fetid pulpy evidence in your duffel pocket, it will emit a quiet heat. You taught me to compost once. To spread my old ideas over planted fields, pray for green. But you took the seeds. You called to say that. You took the seeds. You needed them. You're sorry. Let's have some love poems. Do you want some love poems? This is a remix of another piece earlier in the book, which can't really be read aloud. This is called Feedback Loop, the remix. Stripping you of the lies that get you through this life. Speaking you free of any name that came before the one you're trying on this week, pulling you out from underneath ideas of gender that would seek to keep you still. Pulling you out long and slowly, taking my time. Derailing any hope dysphoria I might have, slipping in around the sides of your blindfold with the sunrise. And following its gold across your skin, or is that not the sunrise? Falling into you, into this feedback loop of feeling, its current crackling and sparking green at every place we meet. And we call each other mine, and we sink our teeth into the other's neck to prove it, stifling the triumph in our cries while our parents sleep below. I fall into you until I can fall no higher. Fall for you to pick me up again. I would do anything, not again, but I leave it there, you know. This love poem is called Archivists. It lives in I love you as it lives in I'm scared too. It lives in the be careful, it lives in welcome home. It lives in every late night subway ride survived alone these days. As it lives in every risk we hesitate to let each other take. It lives in our never throwing old tickets, little notes, or anything at all away. Every twinned scrap and artifact, our pocket shrines. Your wallet bulges with what if it were to happen, as my closet fills up with this would be all I'd have. My handwritten lines, your sweaty shirts and sealed bags. It lives in while you stir from sleep around me, my lifting high the camera to immortalize this deeply mortal thing. And look at how it lives in this one. Safe for now, entangled in the shroud of dawn. How it is alive. Good morning, is it raining? Okay, in case any classics students here or other people who like Roman stuff might know of this little poem by the Emperor Hadrian called Lmabda Fellow. This is a total mistranslation, so to speak, as it's based on a deliberate misreading of this poem, which I don't know, Lmabda. Little soul vagabond. What else? What now? What end of town will you end up on? Naked, blue, frozen into place with, at last, that puppy smile absent from your face. One more. One out of 7 list. One more. This is the last poem in the book, which is called The Coyote Speaks. Liver is life in the city. We learn and lapse in language, stain our coat to match the shade in alleys. We make a dance of dodging cars, weave as needles through our secret ways. We sharpen our ears on every stone thrown, grow and readying from every fight we face. Men call us different names, they hate us. They fear that we might take their sons to eat or to make them wild too, which is by our fate. Still, it is no miracle that we have lived this long. Deliberate is life. The refusal to starve, the refusal to be preyed upon. We look into windows, ask what luxury is stasis really. They who never change, what can they know for sure? What can they know of shelter? They who never sleep beneath the stars. What can they learn about the stars if the stars are ever in their favor? How will they know their way home if they never have to leave? How will they know this is where they're meant to be? Who are they really? Who told them that? What are they living in response to? Well, we rise to meet the city where, once, a cage was built around us as we lay asleep. A city that would see us fall behind. Deliberate is life in our refusal to. Let us now and never take pride in our refusal. Who could know becoming as we do? Power in what it is to live with such intention. Sing it with me. We become more sure of who we are than you. We become more sure of who we are than you. We become more sure of who we are than you. We become more sure of who we are than they do. We become more sure of who we are than you. We become more sure of who we are than you. We become more sure of who we are than you. We become more sure of who we are than they do.
Maybe stay, or I don't know, you can go back to your chair, I don't care, whatever. It's a pretty small group.
Share it at the table.
Yeah. By all means. You sort of crossed over at U of T, but knew each other more at Guelph, is that correct?
We've never met here.
You didn't meet her, okay.
No,
Yeah, Google, okay.
it's not that big a place, but like just big enough. Yeah.
Yeah, how are you?
The same. Well, hi, how do you feel about this?
So I mean, questions, I mean, I have questions in my pocket, but you are the ones who this is for.
I was actually gonna ask, because both of you wrote something very different, so could you talk about like your process to being published, kind of, because, yeah, just curious.
I don't know anything. It's a long, weird story. My first book came out about 8 years ago. It was a little novella, and I wrote it when I was like essentially a baby. Basically, what you find in a lot of asking writers, like how they got published, it's generally just meeting the right person at exactly the right time. There are so many talented writers, and I'm talented, and I deserve everything I get, but it was a lot of luck too. And I basically met two people at a music festival who ran a little micro press called Metatron in Montreal, and I liked what they were doing. And then I found out that they had a hole in their schedule in 2016 because a book had been dropped. And I thought to myself, I could fill that for them. And there was a deadline about 4 days away, so I wrote a little novella that I'd had in mind very quickly, sent it to them, and they liked it, and it came out a few months later, which was fast. Normally books take a couple years really to be properly produced. This was not one of those. Based on that and some other stuff, I ended up in the MFA program at the same time as Bronwyn, and I ended up shifting my focus to poetry at this point, and I developed this book in my time in the MFA program. Earlier drafts of it were worse, and I made the mistake of sending it out a little too early to one or two publishers who declined to join me in the process. Eventually, when I had a finished, relatively draft of the book, I sent it to a publisher that I liked called Arsenal Pulp, which is in Vancouver, and it's Canada's only publisher that is an independent publisher exclusively dedicated to publishing the work of queer and trans people. And they liked it and asked to join me in the process. But I don't know if any of this would have gone the same way if I hadn't just talked to two people standing next to me at a music festival when I was still a student here. Yes. You know, like it's good to be ready, you know. I was working very hard on my writing the whole time, and so I was ready for these opportunities when they came to me in these unexpected ways. So that's how. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it, meeting the right people at the right time. I took a novel writing course in my last year at UT and wrote a novel during the course. And that professor who's in charge of the course referred me to his agent, and the manuscript that I wrote during that class, we ended up trying to shop it around at that point. It was probably much too early to try and do that. It wasn't very good. So it was rejected at that stage. And so I tried to write another book and took that back to the agent, and he was like, I don't know about this one. And so then you kind of have to face, do I want to keep writing? Do I want to keep editing this book? Do I want to move on to something else? And I was kind of lucky at that point. I had applied to some MFA programs and got into the Guelph program. And that gave me kind of a longer time to consider which kind of project I wanted to pursue. And then I ended up writing this book in that program. It was the thesis project of that program. And I took it to my agent, and he was like, no. So I worked on it for like another year or so, and then until he was like, okay, yeah. And yeah, then we shopped it at that point, and it's, yeah, the right people at the right time.
I'll also say that there's some sample bias here. Both of us did end up in not only an MFA program, but the same MFA program with the same instructors in the same workshops at the same time. I wouldn't want anyone to come away from this or anything, any younger writer, to believe that okay, what I have to do then is to get an MFA. Almost all of my favorite writers do not have one of these. It is one pathway. It's absolutely not the only pathway. This is a coincidence, a good one, because we're great, but it's a coincidence. So, yes.
Both of your works seem pretty like personal and I find it like writing about your personal emotions and stuff isn't the hard part. It's accepting the fact that other people are gonna read them and form their own opinions about it. So like, what are your like maybe thought process about just like accepting that? Do you just, you're like totally okay with everyone seeing like your personal life? Want to take this one first?
My opinion of this is that they're the one who decided to pick up the book. They knew what they were getting. I don't know. I think that it's possible that my work, especially as represented in here, is a little deceptive in this. A great deal of my poetry is fiction or heavily fictionalized. You know, so there's always going to be some element of truth to anything anybody writes, but I think that I, as a writer, get a great deal more out of taking something that happens to me and completely reinventing it, renovating it ground up, to write about it rather than just literally saying, here's a poem about what happens, which many writers work in that mode successfully, but it doesn't interest me very much. So I don't know, maybe I'm not actually the best person to answer this. Who knows? I think they knew what they were getting.
Yeah, for me, the adult is very fictional. So for me, I didn't feel that much on display, writing it. I'm writing something now, which is much less fictional. And I think that's like something I thought a little bit about writing it, where you kind of think for a moment, oh, what will people think when they read this? But I also think it's just, there's a big disconnect, at least for me, in believing people are gonna read it. Like, when I'm writing it, it doesn't connect that it's actually going to be read until you meet people that have read it. So I think that's helpful, disassociating from that process. Yeah.
Can I ask about the place of poetry in your novel? Because the novel is about aspirational poets, and I guess I have two related questions. One is, did you ever think about, was there ever a draft where you actually like included any of their poetry
Yeah.
in the book? And then just what does poetry mean for these characters? Because it obviously just means something so important for them when you're doing it within the context of the novel.
I thought about it briefly, but then felt like I wouldn't be able to write a good poem for it. So I shied away from doing that. I think, I don't know, for me, the first anything I started writing was poetry, so it feels like a very raw, like it just feels very pure to write poetry. And I guess maybe because it's some of my first writing experiences, that felt like connected between me and the character here, who kind of like falls in love with the problem. I don't know if she falls in love with writing, but who thinks about writing more seriously during like the course of her schooling. So poetry seemed like the way to go for it. And I don't know, I think poetry is like so intense, and so difficult to do correctly. It feels like a good way of, it felt like a good way of just showing the disparity, like in skill and like talent between students in a workshop setting. It feels like way worse to be bad at poetry, I think, than bad at prose, at least in my experience. It's way harder to be like, it feels way more personal to be bad at poetry. It's very heartbreaking, but Yeah, so I don't know, I'm interested in poetry, I think it's really great when people do it well. And that's why I put it in there.
I'm gonna ask you both about humor. You have this great deadpan take on the character, and like it's there's a lot, I mean, even in the reading. And like I'm chuckling in parts that I don't know, if they're appropriate to chuckle, and yours like is like more mischief. It feels like you're like going into things and then playing with them in ways that maybe they weren't, like, I'm not sure Adrian was, not Adrian.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, Adrian, I'm not sure Adrian was prepared for what was gonna happen to him with that, you know, like, in that sort of sense of mischief. So I guess, I don't know, I'm curious about how you feel humor plays a part in the way you write.
Really funny. I'm sorry, what else can I say? I think that I understand. Okay, on a straight up craft level alone, I think that I have worked in, I've worked in music, I've done stuff on like various things on stages, and I've hosted a great many events over the course of my life, and I noticed that I've like seen audiences respond to a wide variety of poetry and film, theater, everything. And humor is the most excellent lubricant for someone's attention span. I think you can keep it going so much longer. So I don't know, to put a little bit of levity into a poetry book, which where it isn't expected, might be enough to keep someone turning the next page and the page after that. And also, I just think I'm really funny, and so it's like, let me show off. Well, that's all. But I also really enjoy. I also really enjoy exactly the deadpan effect of this narrator too. Because I was in class with you, you're also funny. You're a little
What?
sly about it. No, you're sly about it.
Yeah.
Quiet doesn't, that's not right.
That's not. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, I didn't really think that much about like how to make it funny. I think it's like, I wanted to like, I think it's like I want to like the people in the book, especially like Natalie. And I like when people are funny, like it's nice. So I feel like that's almost a way of relating and kind of, yeah, forming your own little relationship with like the characters and making them funny in their own peculiar ways. Like Bart is funny in like a specific way, and then Natalie's different than that. And yeah, I think it's like kind of a bonding thing.
Laura's very serious.
Yeah, very serious. It's,
She's the adult.
yeah, she's the adult. Adults aren't funny. Yeah, she's less funny, so not everyone can be funny, but some people can. And some of these people are a bit funny. I'm happy when people say it's funny, because most of the people are like, it's so sad. And I'm like, oh, that is nothing there. So I thought think it's fun too.
What's one of the final decisions that you made about each of your pieces? Like, what was the final nail in the coffin that you knew that it was, that you could let it go?
Yeah, but I was wrong about mine.
Oh, you're wrong where ending or final point?
Well, I don't know. Well, it's a collection of poems. I didn't really write it in a linear manner, but I thought. I wrote this book, it's really so long. I am extraordinarily proud of it. And then about 2 months after it was far too late to make any changes. I'm just like, there's about 3 pages I should have taken out. So that's a secret I'm only telling you, when you're watching me through this. Yeah, so, I thought I had taken so much out, this book could have been 3 times as long. And a lot of the editorial process for me was just removing. But you never, no one ever cuts enough out. And I always kind of secretly look down on the other writers for not ever editing themselves well enough. And I'm just, I didn't either. Like, I fell into the same trap. Crying maybe, who knows? So I thought it was done. I thought I'd finally taken out like enough poems that this is a cohesive, coherent manuscript, and it is, but I still would have taken out 2 more pages. So
Do you think if you'd done that, then like that would still be like that's the piece? Do you still consider those pages a part of the piece now?
oh, I absolutely do, yeah. For a moment, at first, I misunderstood where you were about to go with this follow-up question, and I thought you were going to ask like, would I just continue cutting and cutting and cutting?
No.
1 page left, and a lot of blank pages to pad it so it could be sold. No. I do, yeah, of course, they're part of this, and I wrote them, and I think they're good, or I wouldn't have wasted my time writing them, but I am really interested in a collection of anything, whether it's stories or poems or an album of songs or anything. Feeling like there is a progression, like there is a path forward. It doesn't have to be straight, super linear, but there needs to be something. It's, you know, I continue to love it for all its detours, though, yeah.
Yeah, I think that there's like a lot of different points where you feel like it could be done. And then you'll have someone read it and be like, well, there's problems with it, or, you know, there's different things that will open you to it again. And then you have to, yeah, remove a bunch of words or change a bunch of things. And then it kind of becomes like alive and fresh to you again, and you have to work on it. And then you think, well, certainly now it's finished. And it's not for a long time. And then I feel like near the end, like I kind of thought I would be like, well, it's not done yet, it's not done. But I think you work on it so long, you're like, it's done. Right, it's gotta be done. So for me, in terms of just the process, it felt like I've looked at it, so I can't do anything more for it. If it's gonna be what it is at this point. So that kind of felt settled. Yeah.
Thank you.
It's done with you.
It's not a me, I can't do anything for it.
Like, it's done with me.
Yeah.
Yes.
Any other opinion from the Zoom?
Oh, that's how it was here.
Yeah. Me too.
We still are.
Yes.